So I have to be real with you guys, right? There are many speakers I would buy again. I love speakers, let's face the facts. However, there are 5 speakers that's on my list right now that I kind of want to buy again. It's like an itch, so I'm making this video instead. So here are my 5 choices, and in case any of these speakers do not fall into your budget, like mine right now, don't worry, I got you. I will also provide alternative options. What other speakers would I buy if the speakers don't fit into my budget? And all the speakers that I'll be mentioning in this video have been reviewed on this channel fully, so if you want a more in-depth review, including gear matching and speaker placement to make it sound its best, then make sure to check out the reviews in the description below. Now, let's get to it. Now, the first speaker that I've been getting an itch to purchase again is the Totem Tribe Towers. Now, this is a slim loudspeaker, and when I say slim, I mean like slim. This is probably the most slim, compact tower loudspeaker I have gotten in here ever to review. And in fact, I bought this with my own money when I reviewed it, and man, it's such a beautiful loudspeaker. When I first got it, I was a little bit underwhelmed by the size and how slim it was for the money, but you know what they say, size doesn't matter. Now, don't underestimate this loudspeaker for its size because it really is a great loudspeaker. Not only does the mid-bass smack and punch your guts, it does have quite extended bass, but of course, it's a slim loudspeaker, so if you want more extended bass, maybe adding a subwoofer would do you some good. However, overall, the beauty of this loudspeaker is that because it's so slim, it has the imaging capability and the sound staging capability of a bookshelf loudspeaker. So let's say you're in a confined space, like a hotel, apartment. You live in an apartment. You don't live in a hotel, but you live in an apartment. If you were in a space like that and you were thinking of getting a bookshelf speaker, but then you were like, you know what, I want to try tower speakers, but my space is too small. Well, this is probably a good place to start because you get the dynamics of a floor stander, but you get also the imaging and the sound staging of a bookshelf speaker. And the tonality of this loudspeaker is addictive. That's how I would describe it, right? Addictive. The sense of addiction to it because it sounds so pure, like a single driver would, right? However, when you compare it to other loudspeakers, warmer loudspeakers, brighter loudspeakers, overall, I found this loudspeaker's tonality to be a little bit on the clinical side of neutral. Not too much, just slight bit. It has technicalities, it's a little bit, spicy, but not by much. Yet, that's not all to it though. When I compare it to other loudspeakers, like I mentioned in my review of the Totem Tribe Towers, it almost makes other loudspeakers' tonality sound almost broken. That's how good it is. The tonality, the strings, the vocals sound so realistic, at least to my ears, and that's the beauty with this loudspeaker. It's not just about a slim loudspeaker that's packing a mid-bass punch and dynamics that's wowing you. Yes, that's the first thing you notice, but the more you listen to it, the more addicted you get to that tonality and the other qualities that this loudspeaker offers. Add a subwoofer. Now you have really good sub-bass to treble, everything, just full range. Amazing. However, before even adding a subwoofer, the price of the speaker alone is $5,300 US. It's not an inexpensive loudspeaker. Yes, the quality is there. There's a whole technology behind just making the drivers behave by itself without a crossover. So there is no crossover for the woofers, right? Just a single capacitor to the tweeter. There was a lot of R&D that went into driver design. Those drivers are quality and really it's what makes the speaker sound so pure in my opinion because there's no crossover in the signal path whatsoever. It's just behaving by itself. So anyways, before I get too nerdy on you, it's a really good loudspeaker. But in case it is not within your budget, my choice will be the much more affordable KLH Kendall loudspeakers. Now this is also a slim tower loudspeaker, but not quite as slim as the Totem Tribe Towers, ironically. And the price point is quite attractive at $1,300 US. Much less than the Totem Tribe Towers. But man, this speaker really good with the tonality. Not quite like the Totem Tribe Towers, but quite eluding, quite addictive as well. And it has similar qualities. It has that sense of purity, has good high frequency sparkle and sweetness. It has good mid-bass punch. It actually has a little bit more extension than the Totem Tribe Towers, which is odd. Less money, more sub-bass. Yeah. But nevertheless, if you are a bass person and you really like that deep bass, then you probably want to add a subwoofer to this anyways. So regardless, it's a very attractive speaker for the price. Now you have to get behind the more cheaper finish of the loudspeakers, as well as the cheaper drivers, cheaper crossover. But I mean, it's a pretty good speaker overall in sound, despite all that. Also, this loudspeaker is now discontinued. They have a new version of this. I believe it's called a 2F or whatever. So you probably can get this from either dealers or leftover stock or used for much cheaper. So yeah, the KLH Kendalls, the originals, not the new ones. That's what I would get if I can't afford the Totem Tribe towers. Now, next speaker is the Arendal 1723 THX loudspeakers. Now, this is a big loudspeaker, okay? It's a lot of loudspeakers for the money, and I actually had to sell it, and the only reason I had to sell it was because I didn't have enough room. Like, I was running out of room because a lot of stuff come in here for review that needs to be reviewed, and so I had to let it go, and it broke my heart. It really did, because this loudspeaker is akin to the performance of one of my favorite loudspeakers of all time, the Wilson Audio Sabrinas. And you might not believe me, but I literally heard the Wilson Audio Sabrina X at the store right before I came back home and set these up and started listening to it. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? This is not a $20,000 loudspeaker. Now, that doesn't mean the speaker is like $1,000. No, it's not an inexpensive loudspeaker either. It retails for $3,890 or something. So $3,900, let's call it, right? So still pretty pricey, $3,900. But it's like, to me, like akin to, is it a Porsche or a Ferrari? Because Ferrari is like too much. Porsche, I'll take it. No, I won't. But yeah, that's how I would put it. It's like adding a Ferrari engine into a Honda CR-V. Terrible idea. Don't do that. Terrible idea. But it's kind of like that. The Arendal 1723 THX, one of the reasons I called it a giant killer, and some people were like, oh, no, giant killers are $4,000. Great. But the point there was that, well, this is a loudspeaker that I find to really perform in the high-end level for very reasonable price, in my opinion, for what you get. First of all, this is a gigantic loudspeaker. This is a full-size loudspeaker. It's not a slim tower. I mean, the thing uses HDF as the cabinet material instead of MDF or other cheaper alternatives out there. It uses high-quality cabinet material. It uses proper bracing. It has good quality components. There's really not a lot to dislike about this loudspeaker. It has THX certification, which means that it's been measured a gazillion times to make sure that it performs, like every pair performs equally as well, right? So there's a lot of things to really love about the overall quality in the building process and the R&D process of this loudspeaker. And the result really shows, because the bass, the dynamics, the extension, this loudspeaker is just crazy in the sub-bass region, has a lot of bass and texture in the bass, right? And you know what? That high frequency is really what is key to me, because I actually prefer it even compared to speakers like Wilson Audio Sabrinas, right? Because the high frequency is sweet. Yes, it has detail and has finesse, but it's that high frequency sweetness. It has this perfect balance in the high frequency, at least for me, right? Some people may find it too rolled off, some people may find it too bright, but at least for me, it's as neutral as they come, right? They really hit the nail on the head there in terms of that tuning of the high frequency. It's really fine balance between bright and warm. And it has that sense of sparkle, but just enough so that it feels sweet. It's like tingly to your ears. Tingles. The mid-range is pretty much neutral. The strings, the vocals are natural sounding. They have a pretty neutral tone to it. There's not much coloration there, in my opinion. If anything, it's slightly warm, slightly inviting sound because it does have that bass presence. And overall, like I said, it's just a lot of speaker for the money. You know what I'm saying? It's a big tower speaker for the money, and it performs like a big tower speaker. It has a scale, it has a dynamics, so you can pair this up with like a tube amplifier. And I prefer to pair this speaker with a tube amplifier, personally speaking, because one of the downside with it is because it's such a large tower, it doesn't have the sound staging like a Totem Tribe tower, a slim tower speaker, or a bookshelf loudspeaker that has a lot more room around it to like portray that soundstage. So it doesn't sound as wide or deep or holographic as a bookshelf or a slim tower speaker. But when you made it with a tube integrated amplifier, it doesn't have to be expensive. It could be like the Wilson 300B, that I reviewed, right? And that opens up the soundstage, right? It's really, really nice, you know, added sweetness on the top from the tubes. Yeah, overall, I would pair this with a tube integrated amplifier, really nice one, you know, and call it a day. It really has that bass presence. The soundstage opens up from the tubes. What's not to love? What's not to love? Now, there's a big downside to it, and it's mostly my downside, because I was really thinking, you know, I was really squeezing my little brains, thinking hard. And honestly, I could not come up with an alternative. I could not think of a less expensive, affordable alternative for this. I'm sorry, there's no alternative for this one. I think it's already an incredible value speaker. I can't find another speaker that will do the same or similar thing for a lesser price. Okay, moving away from the tower loudspeakers, let's go to a bookshelf loudspeaker, and this is going to be no one's surprise, but a while back I sold my KEF LS50 Meta loudspeakers. I missed them already. I want them back, and I'm probably going to buy ones very soon. And this will be like my 15th time that I've sold and bought the KEF LS50 or the Meta version again. And there's a good reason for it. Now, first of all, this loudspeaker is under $2,000. It's about $1,600 US. And in the used market, if you are okay with getting it secondhand, then you can probably get it for less than that, right? And so it's a very versatile loudspeaker. First of all, it's a dual concentric design, meaning there's a tweeter around a mid woofer, right? And it's that kind of dual concentric design, right, really brings something that other speakers don't. And what that is that phase coherency. There's a sense of perfect imagery, right? And when you listen to imagery on loudspeakers these days, all of them are pretty good. You still get that locked in center and all that kind of stuff. But when you hear a dual concentric design, and some people are more sensitive to this than I am, but even I get that sensation, right? That more locked in, focused, seamless focus of the imagery and instruments placed in correct spots. Now, the downside with the KEF LS50 though, right, is that the price point is attractive. It's a very attractive price point for a very well engineered loudspeaker. Measures well, sounds great. However, it is about 85 dB in sensitivity, and it is not the, you know, it's not the hardest speaker to drive, but it's not the easiest speaker to drive either. So ideally, you want some quality amplification behind it, and not only that, you want power behind it. Now, my choice would be like a Hagel H190, right? An all-in-one Hagel integrated amplifier, because Hagel is just a really good match with KEF, right? They've used it in the shows before, they used to collaborate, and there's good reason for that, because when I matched KEF speakers with Hagel, I'm like, whoa, the phase coherency I was talking about, the overall coherency, the overall dynamics, it almost like feels like it grabs onto the speaker and controls the dynamics, and overall makes the speaker really shine at what it already does very well, right? So you get really good kind of bass response, as well as imagery, detail retrieval, and all those kind of stuff. The only thing is, to some people, right? To some people, the upper mid-range may become a little bit clinical, right? A little bit clinical depending on the pairing. But at least for me with the Hagel, I didn't get that clinical sensation. I really loved it with the Hagel gear. Now, a lot of people want to try tube amplifiers with it. I've tried tube amplifiers with it. I never really liked KEF LS50s with tube amplifiers, believe it or not. And I prefer overall powerhouse amplifiers. If you're gonna get the KEF LS50s, remember you're probably gonna have to spend about double on amplification alone to make it really sing. And that is the downside with the KEF LS50 Meta, in my opinion. However, the good thing is that it scales. Like, I've heard KEF LS50s with like really budget amplifiers, and then all the way up to like $1,000,000 amplifiers like Dan D'Agostino and stuff. And it really scales. The more quality amplifier you put behind it, the more the speaker gives. So it's quite of a gem of a loudspeaker. Again, I would add a subwoofer because it is a bookshelf speaker if you are someone that wants deep bass extension, but for a bookshelf speaker, has plenty of bass punch. Now, in case you're like, I don't want to spend $1,600 on a loudspeaker, let alone spend double the amount on amplification to make it sound really good and sing, well, if you want something really inexpensive to start out because this is your first speaker or whatever, then I would suggest the PSB P5, right? For $400 and actually on sale right now for $300, I believe. It's a really good loudspeaker. I mean, it's a small, compact loudspeaker, yes. However, I really like this for like desktop setups more than stereo setups because on desktops, it has that KLH 50 sound. It does for me, right? It has really good measurements as well, but it has that overall neutrality. It does have a little bit of spice to it, and it does have that sweetness. It does have a metal dome tweeter, but it has a phase plug that allows the dispersion to be better so that, you know, it doesn't destroy and ring your ears. It's a really overall a well thought out loudspeaker. Yes, it's much cheaply built than the KLH 50 metals, and in overall performance, it's not quite the same. But overall, if you're just starting out and you're like, I want a quality loudspeaker that sounds good, measures well, and is designed by a reputable brand and engineer, well, I think that's the only alternative I personally would buy instead of the KLH 50 Meta if I was looking for a less expensive version of the KLH 50 Meta. But that's just me. Now, next speaker that I've been wanting to really buy again is the Alta Alyssa. Now, this is a really pretty looking loudspeaker. It's really well finished. Now, the style is quite unique, and the reason for the shape is also has to do with the sound. This is a transmission line loudspeaker and also ported at the same time. So it's a very interesting loudspeaker, and when you hear it for the first time, the first thing that comes to your mind is like, whoa, that's a lot of bass. That's a lot of bass for a bookshelf speaker. Well, the truth is that this is not really a small bookshelf speaker. It is quite hefty, right? It's like KEF R3 kind of level of hefty in size. And marry that with a transmission and a port design, it's a monster, right? The warmth, the mid-range, the smoothness in the top frequency, in the mid-range, right? If you're someone that likes jazz, if you're someone that really vibes with that smooth sound that I talk about in my videos, that I like, that analog sound, this is a great loudspeaker that just makes me drool. You know, the mid-range is so like lucid. It's like I can reach in and grab the singer, the sound staging, the imagery, right? But this is a totally different loudspeaker from the ones I've talked about earlier because this is a warm, luscious loudspeaker, right? But if you pair it up with other gear, solid state gear that does have that analytical behavior, it starts to behave in a different way as well. It starts to become a little bit more analytical, a little bit more sparkle on the top end, and some people may like that. But with most gear that I've tried, right, it does have that really nice, thick sound, right? But of course, it does have a downside to it. And the downside is, well, the odd shape. That finding a right stand for it could be a challenge, right? It may look awkward on a lot of the stands out there. The other downside is that it's also $5,000 and $6,000 if you want a really nice finish. And that is quite pricey. $6,000 US, $5,000 US for a loudspeaker is quite pricey. The alternative would be something like the Buchardt S400 Mark II. Similar, not quite, but again, similar. Now, the Buchardt S400 Mark II is $2,500 US approximately. Overall, the Buchardt S400 Mark II has that smoothness right on the top and the mid-range as well. And overall, it's like slightly warmer sound. And it does have that bass extension, it does, but it doesn't have like a deep, crazy bass exaggeration like the Buchardt S400 original, the Mark I did. The Mark II is more refined, like I said, it's like a totally different loudspeaker now. And it has that smoothness, it has that kind of analog feeling. The edges are, you know, not smeared, but edged off just nicely. So it feels refined, extended, but refined. And it's a more, I feel like more of a mature high-end sound than the Buchardt Mark I. Now, I know some people like the Mark I better than the Mark II because the Mark II has less space overall. But when you really play around with placement, which I like to place it a little bit closer to the wall than I usually like it, the Buchardt S400 Mark II really comes to life. So Buchardt S400 Mark II placement, I would say, is almost 60 to 70% of the game. And then the pairing of amplifiers also matters. Again, with the Buchardt S400 Mark II, I prefer solid-state amplifiers that's a little bit more on the brighter side of neutral, a little bit more analytical behavior. For example, like NAD C298, which is a Class D amplifier, right? It has a little bit more of that analytical behavior. Also, something like Name Gear, any of the Name Gear would do nicely, right? Any of the AXXES from Audio Group Denmark group, stuff like that would work really well with the Buchardt S400 Mark II, in my opinion, because it just brings the speaker to life a little bit. It opens it up a little bit because it has a warmer sound signature, right? But if you want to go full on warm, then you can. You can just get a really warm amplifier like the Dan F-Rip's flagship amplifier, Apollo, and it will give you that thick, really authoritative kind of sound. So it can, again, with pairing of different amplifiers, you can go different ways with this loudspeaker. And overall, it sounds good either way. It just depends on your taste. But overall, I think this is a really good loudspeaker that will stand the test of time. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's all hype. But yes, it's hyped because it's good. Now, however, let's say you're like, okay, I cannot spend any of the money that you're talking about in this video. This is probably the least expensive loudspeaker I will be talking about in this video, and that is the Mission QX2s. This is a really good loudspeaker, okay? The quality of this loudspeaker is incredible for the money you are getting. When you actually get it in your hands and feel the heft of this loudspeaker, the build quality of this loudspeaker, you're like, this is about 500 bucks? That's crazy. Yeah, this loudspeaker is actually built better than most $3,000 loudspeakers out there, man. Like, it's quite amazing how they can do that for 500 bucks. And you would think, well, then it must sound crappy. But no, the sound, literally when I reviewed it, it was titled the Poor Man's Buchardt S400 Mark II, or the Dynaudio Special 40. Because while it's not exactly the Buchardt S400 Mark II or the Special 40, right? Not exactly, but for 500 bucks, man, it gets close. It has that bass authority, it has that texture, it has that clarity. Yes, it's not as refined on the edges like the Buchardt S400 Mark II. It's not as mature of a high-end sound you're getting. But you know what? It's a really good loudspeaker for 500 bucks. It seriously blows a lot of the competition out of the waters, and it makes you baffled how this loudspeaker is 500 bucks. It's kind of like that cheap rent, right? Like you got in when it was cheap and you can't get out now because, everywhere else you look, it's more expensive and you just can't justify the cost of moving. My life story. So yeah, if you want a really good set of $500 bookshelf speakers, you can get the QX2 from Mission Audio and you probably won't be disappointed. And I believe they have a Mark II version of this now, so the Mark I version that I reviewed must be, selling for less in the used market or at dealers or whatever. So yeah, it's a really good loudspeaker. If you can get it for lower than that, then it's even better. Now, last but not the least, this is one of my favorite loudspeaker of all time. I believe I gave the product of the year for this back in 2021 or 2022. But this was the KLH Model 5 loudspeakers, right? The KLH Model 5 loudspeaker is a more of a retro vibe loudspeaker, but this is not a vintage loudspeaker. This is in fact a modern loudspeaker designed by KLH, and this was really a hit when it came out, and rightfully so. It's an acoustic suspension design, meaning basically it's a sealed design. There's no ports, so mostly all the bass you're hearing is the drivers and the cabinet doing the work. And it's really nice because it gives you that nice extension, but also that punch, that fast punch. And it's different from a ported design in how it's portrayed. It also measures extremely well, which was kind of a head scratcher for me because I found it a little bit more color than what the measurements came out at NRC. Yeah, that's still a mystery to me. But overall, the sound characteristic of this loudspeaker is eluding. It's really, really good. Especially my favorite pairing with this was the Dan F-Rip's Hades and Thallo combination. And that is incredible combination, I'm telling you, with the KLH Model 5. I was hearing things behind me, to the side. It was wild. When placed correctly with the speakers and the amplifier pairing, this speaker is something that is hard to rival. It's something, you know, it's one of those things, it's like apple and oranges, right? You can't really compare, you know, Buchardt S400 Mark II or any of the other loudspeakers I'm comparing in this video to this one, because it's just so different. What the KLH Model 5 brings to the table is different from what other speakers bring to the table, because this loudspeaker gives you a sense of what acoustic suspension loudspeakers can do. And once you hear an acoustic suspension design, it's kind of like when you hear a dual concentric loudspeaker, like I talked about. Sometimes you just can't go back. And sometimes you feel like you want to hear that sound of an acoustic suspension design. And it's hard to explain because it's tactile, but it has those nuances in the music while the bass is full. Yes, it doesn't extend and hit you in the guts like a 15-inch or a ported design would, but this, right, without even a subwoofer. I actually prefer the speaker without a subwoofer because it has that dynamic punch that only acoustic suspension designs can provide, and it's so nice and satisfying. And you know, the alternative to this loudspeaker doesn't really exist in my opinion, right? Because of that. Like I said, I feel like it's apples to oranges, especially with the Dan Fripp's, you know, Hades and Thallo pairing. The KLH Model 5 is hard to find an alternative for. But of course, I do have an alternative for it, and what the alternative is might surprise you. So if you didn't know, the KLH Model 5 actually existed, right? So people think that the old vintage KLH Model 5 is what inspired the current KLH Model 5. But it's actually quite different designs. In fact, the KLH Model 5, the one that I'm talking about right now, the modern KLH Model 5, was actually inspired by AR3A, by Acoustic Research. Yes, now this is a vintage loudspeaker that you can have for about $1,000 used, maybe less, depending on the condition. There's many versions, right? The AR3, AR3A, AR3A special, upgraded, so many versions. But I have one in my collection, and let me tell you, it is not the KLH Model 5. It doesn't sound similar. It has more of a bloom. It has more of a vintage mid-range or warmer sound to it. However, if you're someone that is like, you know what, I really want that acoustic suspension feeling, right, of the bass, of the overall sound. I want to try an acoustic suspension design, but the KLH Model 5 is just out of the budget, right? $2,500 US. It's just a little bit out of the budget. Then maybe for half the price, you can get the vintage AR3A or one of the variants to try out an acoustic suspension design that have inspired many speakers, including the KLH Model 5 that I'm talking about in this video that I love so much. But again, it's not quite the same thing, but it is a viable alternative that I feel like you would appreciate if you were looking at the KLH Model 5. So yeah, that was my 5 pick of what speakers I would buy again if I were to buy something again, which right now I can't. That's why I'm making this video, to satisfy myself. So thanks for joining me, and let me know in the comment section, what speaker have you sold or gotten rid of, you know, in the last few years and still miss? Still want to buy again, or planning to buy again? Let me know in the comment section, and I'll see you guys on my next video. Until next time.